In the cavernous silence of the Chicago Public Library, two small girls were building a fortress out of books, a desperate act of childhood in a world that had grown too large and too cold. This is a story about how a simple act of decency can unravel a web of fear, revealing a truth no one expected. If you believe in our mission to rescue these stories of courage, consider supporting us with a super thanks. And if you already stand with David, leave a "Stay Strong, David" in the comments below. The year was 1958, and Sergeant David Cole, recently returned from a tour in Korea, was a man adrift. The uniform that had given him purpose and a clear, if dangerous, place in the world now felt like a costume in a city that didn't know what to do with him. He was a hero who couldn't find a decent job, a leader of men now tasked with mopping the floors of this very library. The night shift was his sanctuary, a time of quiet and order where he could push a mop and try to make sense of a life that had been fractured by war and then fractured again by a peace that felt anything but. He first noticed the girls a week ago. They were sisters, he could tell, one about 10, the other maybe 8. They were quiet, impeccably behaved, and they spent every afternoon in the children's reading section until the library was about to close. They looked lost. Not in the way a child separated from their mother is lost, but in a deeper, more permanent way. Their clothes were clean but plain and too thin for the encroaching autumn chill. They didn't have the easy, boisterous energy of other children. They moved with a quiet, watchful caution, as if they were afraid of taking up too much space. They were little ghosts haunting the history section. David felt a pang of a feeling he couldn't quite name. It was a mixture of pity, recognition, and a fierce protective instinct. He had seen children like them in the war, small, solemn survivors who had seen too much, their childhoods extinguished by the cold realities of the adult world. He kept his distance, respecting their fragile privacy, but he watched over them from afar as he did his rounds, a silent, unseen guardian. The trouble started with the boys. They were older, maybe 14 or 15, with the lazy, arrogant cruelty of teenagers who have never known a real hardship in their lives. They saw the two quiet girls as easy prey. It started with whispers and taunts, then escalated to them knocking over the girls' carefully constructed book fortress. The younger girl, Chloe, had tears welling in her eyes. The older one, Isabel, just stood there, her small shoulders squared, her face a pale, defiant mask, as she silently began to rebuild. David had seen it all from the end of the aisle. He had learned in the army that you don't always rush in with guns blazing. Sometimes the most effective weapon is a quiet, unshakable presence. He walked slowly, deliberately down the aisle, the soft squeak of his work boots, the only sound. He didn't say a word to the teenagers. He just stopped beside them, his large frame a sudden solid presence, and began to methodically re-shelf the books they had scattered, his movements calm and efficient. The boys, unnerved by this silent, powerful adult who refused to acknowledge them, shuffled their feet and mumbled half-hearted insults before slinking away, their power deflated. David turned to the two girls. Their eyes were wide, a mixture of fear and gratitude. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice a low, gentle rumble that was at odds with his imposing size. Isabel, the older one, nodded, still clutching her sister's hand. "They're just mean," she said, her voice a small, tight whisper. "Some people are," David agreed simply. He looked at their thin coats. The library would be closing in an hour, and the wind whipping off Lake Michigan was brutal that evening. "You two have a warm place to go?" Isabel nodded again, a little too quickly. "Yes, sir. Our mother is waiting for us." David knew she was lying. He could see it in the flicker of her eyes, in the way she refused to meet his gaze. But he also knew that to press the point would be to shatter her fragile pride. He had seen that same fierce, desperate pride in the eyes of refugees, in people who had lost everything but their dignity. "All right then," he said, giving them a small, kind smile. "You finish your reading. I'll be around." He walked away, but the image of their pale, pinched faces stayed with him. He finished his shift, the rhythmic work of mopping and cleaning doing little to quiet his troubled mind. As he was getting ready to leave, he saw the girls huddled by the main entrance, pulling their thin coats tight, bracing themselves to step out into the cold, dark city. He couldn't just let them go. His conscience, the unyielding moral compass that had guided him through the chaos of war, would not allow it. He went to the small cafe across the street and bought 2 steaming cups of hot chocolate and a bag of fresh donuts. He walked back and found the girls still by the door, hesitating. "Wait up," he said, his voice gentle. He held out the cups and the bag. "No soldier should go into the cold without proper rations. It's against regulations." The girls stared at the offering, their eyes wide with disbelief. It was a simple act of kindness, but in their world, a world that seemed to have forgotten them, it was a miracle. Chloe, the younger one, looked at her sister for permission. Isabel hesitated for a moment, her pride warring with the undeniable, wonderful smell of chocolate and warm pastry. Then she gave a small, solemn nod. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper, as she took the cups and the bag. David just nodded in return, a lump forming in his own throat. "Stay safe out there, little soldiers," he said, and then he turned and walked away into the cold Chicago night, leaving the 2 small, shivering girls holding his simple, anonymous offering of warmth and human decency. He didn't know their names. He didn't know their story. He only knew that he had seen a small injustice, and he had done what little he could to make it right. He had no idea that this small, simple act of kindness had just set him on a collision course with a past he had tried to forget, and a future he could never have imagined. David walked home through the biting Chicago wind, the image of the 2 girls' faces, a mixture of fierce pride and desperate, heartbreaking gratitude, seared into his mind. His own small, rented room in a rundown building on the south side felt colder and emptier than usual. The hot chocolate and donuts had been a simple, impulsive gesture, a temporary shield against the cold, but he knew it wasn't enough. He was a man trained to solve problems, not to put temporary patches on them. And these 2 girls, these little soldiers, as he had called them, were a problem he couldn't just walk away from. The next evening, he went to his shift at the library with a new sense of purpose. He was no longer just a janitor. He was on a mission. The girls were there, as he knew they would be, in their usual corner of the children's section. They saw him and exchanged a quick, shy glance. The younger one, Chloe, gave him a small, tentative wave. He nodded back, a silent acknowledgement that a fragile, unspoken alliance had been formed. He kept his distance, allowing them their space, but he watched. He saw the way Isabel would read to her younger sister, her voice a low, serious murmur. He saw the way Chloe would trace the pictures in the books with a small, chapped finger. They were not just passing time, they were seeking refuge. The library, with its high ceilings, its endless rows of books, and its quiet, predictable order, was their fortress against the chaos of the world outside. As the evening wore on, David began to formulate a plan. He couldn't interrogate them. He couldn't force them to accept help they weren't ready to ask for. He had to build trust. He had to become a safe, reliable part of their landscape. So he began a quiet, patient campaign. Every evening he would find an extra sandwich from his lunch pail or a couple of apples and leave them on the table where the girls were reading. He would do it when they weren't looking, a silent, anonymous offering. He never mentioned the food. He just let it appear, a small, daily miracle. At first, the girls were hesitant, looking at the offerings with a mixture of suspicion and longing. But after a few days, they began to accept them, eating the food with a quiet, solemn hunger that was painful to watch. They were being fed, not just with sandwiches and apples, but with a steady, reliable kindness, a sustenance their young lives were clearly starved for. A week into this silent routine, a small breakthrough occurred. David was doing his rounds when Isabel approached him, her face set with a look of serious purpose. She was holding a book, a thick, imposing-looking volume of American history. "Sir," she said, her voice small but clear, "I can't reach the book I need. It's on the top shelf." David followed her to the history aisle. She pointed to a book, wedged tightly on a shelf far above her head. "That one," she said, "the one about the Civil War." David easily retrieved the book and handed it to her. He was about to walk away when he noticed the book she was already holding. It was a dense academic text about the Battle of Gettysburg. "That's some heavy reading for a young lady," he said, a note of gentle surprise in his voice. "Our father was a soldier," Isabel said, her voice full of a quiet, fierce pride. "He was a history professor before the war. He said that to understand the world, you have to understand the wars that made it. He was a captain in the infantry." The past tense of her words "was" hung in the air between them. "He was a brave man then," David said softly. "He was the bravest man in the world," Isabel said, her small chin held high. "He died in Korea." The words hit David like a physical blow. Korea. The same cold, grey, pointless war that had taken a piece of his own soul. He had seen so many good men die there, so many captains, so many fathers. He looked at this small, solemn girl with her fierce pride and her heavy history books, and he saw a fellow survivor, a member of the same sad, invisible fraternity of those who had been left behind by the war. "I was there too," he said, the words coming out before he had a chance to stop them. "In Korea, I was a sergeant." Isabel's eyes widened, her guarded expression softening for the first time with a look of genuine, unfeigned interest. "You were?" she breathed. "Did you know him? Captain Michael Vance?" David's heart gave a painful lurch. Vance, the name was common, but still, "I don't think so," he said gently, not wanting to extinguish the flicker of hope in her eyes. It was a big war, lots of captains, but the connection had been made. He was no longer just the kind janitor. He was a soldier, like her father. He was one of them. The wall of her fierce, protective pride had been breached, not by pity, but by a shared history of loss. From that day on, their interactions changed. Isabel would seek him out, asking him questions about the war, about the army. She was not interested in tales of heroism or glory. She was interested in the details, the logistics, the reality of a soldier's life. What did they eat? Where did they sleep? What was the name of the rifle they carried? He answered her questions honestly, respectfully, speaking to her not as a child, but as an equal, a fellow student of history. He learned their story in fragments, in the small, carefully curated details Isabel chose to share. Their father, Captain Vance, had been a brilliant, beloved history professor at the University of Chicago. When the war in Korea broke out, he had re-enlisted, driven by a sense of patriotic duty. He had been killed in the final brutal months of the conflict. Their mother, Isabel, was more reticent about her. "She got sick," was all she would say, her face closing down, a curtain of grief and something else, something that looked like shame, falling over her features. David pieced together the rest of the story from the things she didn't say. They were alone. Their mother was gone, either dead or had abandoned them. They were living on the streets or in a shelter or some other precarious hidden existence. The library was their school, their home, their only safe place in a world that had become hostile and dangerous. His quiet acts of kindness continued, but they were no longer anonymous. He would bring them sandwiches and sit with them while they ate, talking to Isabel about history and patiently showing Chloe how to draw horses, a subject she was passionate about. He was becoming a part of their routine, a steady, predictable presence in their chaotic lives. He was their friend. But he knew it wasn't enough. Winter was coming. The nights were getting colder. A sandwich and a conversation were not a home. They needed a real sanctuary, a real solution. He was a janitor, a man living on the edge of poverty himself. He had no resources, no power, but he was a sergeant. And a sergeant's job is to take care of his soldiers, especially the little ones. He began to use his own time and resources to investigate. He started with the name Captain Michael Vance, University of Chicago. He spent an afternoon at the university's own library, looking through old yearbooks and faculty directories. He found him, a handsome, smiling man with kind eyes, listed as an assistant professor in the history department. There was a home address listed, an address in the affluent, leafy suburb of Oak Park. David took a bus out to Oak Park the next day, a journey to another world, a world of sprawling houses, manicured lawns, and quiet, tree-lined streets. he found the address. It was a large, beautiful brick house, a home that spoke of a life of comfort, stability, and intellectual grace. But the house was dark, empty. A large "for sale" sign was staked in the front yard. He spoke to a neighbor, an elderly woman who was raking leaves. She remembered the Vance family. "Oh, the professor and his wife," she said, her voice sad. "Such a tragedy. He was killed in that awful war. And then his wife, Eleanor, she just fell apart. A terrible depression. She had a complete breakdown. They had to put her in a sanatorium somewhere. And those two poor little girls, they were sent to live with her brother, I believe. A man named Walter, a businessman of some kind, lived on the North Shore." The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, and they were forming a dark and ugly picture. The girls were not orphans. They had a family, an uncle, a wealthy uncle if he lived on the North Shore. So why were they homeless, living a secret, desperate life in a public library? David found the uncle, Walter Jennings, listed in the phone book. He lived in a massive, sprawling mansion in Winnetka, one of the wealthiest suburbs in the country. David knew he couldn't just march up to the door. He needed to be careful. He needed to understand the terrain before he walked onto it. He spent the next 2 days watching the Jennings mansion. He saw a fleet of expensive cars. He saw servants in uniform. He saw Walter Jennings himself, a portly, imperious-looking man with a hard, cruel mouth. And he saw something else. He saw 2 boys, about the same age as the bullies from the library, getting out of a private school bus. They were dressed in expensive uniforms, their faces holding the same look of lazy, arrogant entitlement. He never saw Isabel and Chloe, not once. He knew then, with a cold, sickening certainty, what had happened. The uncle had taken them in, but he had not welcomed them. He had likely taken control of their inheritance, their father's house, his military pension, and he had cast the 2 small, grieving girls aside. They were not his sons, not the heirs to his fortune. They were a burden, an inconvenience. He had given them a room, perhaps in the servants' quarters, a place out of sight and out of mind, and he had left them to fend for themselves, to be raised by the cold charity of his staff. The girls, with the fierce, wounded pride of children who have lost everything, had created their own world, their own life, centered around the one place where they felt safe, the one place that connected them to the memory of their father, the library. They were not just homeless, they were exiles, living in the shadow of a vast unearned fortune, abandoned by the one person in the world who should have protected them. David returned to the city, his heart a cold, hard knot of rage. He now had the full picture. He understood the enemy. It was not just poverty, not just bad luck. It was greed and cruelty and the profound, callous indifference of the powerful. He was no longer just a janitor trying to help 2 homeless children. He was a sergeant, and he was about to go to war against an enemy. The knowledge of the girls' true circumstances lit a cold, steady fire in David's soul. This was no longer a simple case of misfortune. It was a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty. Walter Jennings was not just a neglectful guardian, he was a thief, a man who had stolen not just his niece's inheritance, but their childhood, their security, their very sense of belonging. The fight was no longer just about getting the girls off the street, it was about justice. David knew that a direct confrontation with a man like Walter Jennings would be a fool's errand. Jennings was a fortress, protected by walls of money, lawyers, and social influence. A poor black janitor making accusations against a North Shore business magnate would be dismissed, discredited, and likely arrested for his trouble. He could not win this war with a frontal assault. He had to be smarter. He had to find a weakness in the fortress walls. He approached the problem as he would a military campaign, with careful planning and a clear objective. His objective was not to destroy Walter Jennings, but to rescue his prisoners. To do that, he needed leverage. He needed a weapon that Jennings would be forced to respect. He went back to the library, not as a janitor, but as a researcher. He spent his days off in the archives, poring over old newspapers, society pages, and business journals. He was building a profile of his enemy, learning everything he could about Walter Jennings. He learned that Jennings was the CEO of a successful manufacturing company, a man who cultivated a public image as a pillar of the community, a philanthropist, a family man. He sat on the boards of charities. He donated to political campaigns. He was a member of the most exclusive country clubs. His reputation, David realized, was his armor. It was also his greatest vulnerability. A man who worked so hard to maintain a pristine public image would be terrified of a scandal that could tarnish it. But David needed more than just the threat of a scandal. He needed a legal weapon. He spent hours in the library's law section, a place he had previously only ever mopped. He read about probate law, about the legal responsibilities of a guardian, about the administration of estates. The language was dense and complicated, but he was a patient, methodical man. He began to understand the legal framework that Jennings was likely exploiting. Captain Vance's estate, the house, the pension, the life insurance would have been placed in a trust for the girls, with Jennings as the administrator. Jennings had a legal fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the children. His neglect, his failure to provide for them, was not just a moral failing, it was a potential crime. David knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed an ally, someone on the inside of the legal and social world that Jennings inhabited. He found his potential ally in an unlikely place, the byline of a series of articles in the Chicago Tribune. The articles were about a recent high-profile inheritance dispute, a case that had exposed the shady dealings of a prominent Chicago family. The reporter's name was Sarah Connolly. Her writing was sharp, incisive, and fearless. She was a journalist who clearly had a passion for exposing the hypocrisy of the rich and powerful. She was, David decided, a soldier he could recruit. Finding her was not difficult. He called the newspaper and left a message, a cryptic but intriguing one. "I have a story for you about a war hero's orphaned children and their very wealthy, very neglectful guardian. They met 2 days later in a small, out-of-the-way diner, far from the prying eyes of the downtown lunch crowd." Sarah Connolly was a woman in her early 30s with a shrewd, intelligent face and eyes that missed nothing. She was skeptical at first, accustomed to chasing down wild tips that led nowhere. David did not begin with accusations. He began with the girls. He told her their story, painting a vivid picture of their quiet dignity, their fierce pride, their secret lonely life in the public library. He spoke of Isabel's passion for history, of Chloe's love of drawing horses. He made them real, not just pathetic victims, but brave, resilient children fighting to survive in a world that had forgotten them. Then he laid out the facts of his investigation. He told her about their father, the war hero professor. He told her about their mother's tragic breakdown, and he told her about their uncle, Walter Jennings, the North Shore millionaire, and the dark, empty mansion where the girls were supposed to be living. He presented his case with the calm, methodical precision of a lawyer, laying out the evidence piece by damning piece. By the time he finished, Sarah Connolly's skepticism had been replaced by a look of intense, focused interest, the look of a predator who has caught the scent of a major story. "This is incredible," she said, her voice a low, excited whisper. "If this is true, this is dynamite. But it's all circumstantial. It's your word against his. He'll deny everything. He'll say the girls are troubled, that they're runaways." "I know," David said. "That's why we need more. We need proof. We need to find their mother." The search for Eleanor Vance, the girl's mother, was the next phase of his campaign. The neighbor in Oak Park had said she was in a sanatorium. It was a vague, old-fashioned term. David and Sarah started with the public records. They searched for commitment papers, for hospital admission records, but they found nothing. Walter Jennings, a man who valued his privacy and his pristine reputation, had likely had his sister committed to a private institution, a place that would be discreet, a place that would not create a paper trail. For weeks, their search was a frustrating series of dead ends. They were running out of time. Winter was tightening its grip on the city, and the girls' thin coats were no match for the brutal Chicago cold. David's quiet campaign of sandwiches and hot chocolate was a temporary measure, a holding action. He needed to win the war. and he needed to do it soon. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. David, in his nightly conversations with Isabel, had learned more about her mother. She had been an artist, a painter. She loved flowers, Isabel had told him, her voice soft with memory, especially irises. She said they were the most elegant flower in the world. It was a small, seemingly insignificant detail. But to David, the trained intelligence officer, no detail was insignificant. An artist, a painter who loved irises. He went back to the library, to the archives of the art world. He looked through old exhibition catalogues from local galleries, searching for a painter named Eleanor Vance, and he found her. She had had a small solo exhibition at a minor downtown gallery in 1951, a year before her husband had been killed. The review in the paper described her work as delicate, impressionistic studies of floral arrangements with a particular focus on irises. The gallery was still in business. David went there the next day. The owner, an elderly, kind-faced man, remembered Eleanor Vance. "Oh, the iris lady," he said, his eyes sad. "Such a talent and such a tragedy. Her husband's death just broke her. She was never the same." "Do you know what happened to her?" David asked, his heart pounding. "Her brother took over," the gallery owner said, his voice laced with a faint old disapproval. "A cold, hard man came in and collected all her unsold paintings, said she was unwell and wouldn't be painting anymore. I heard he put her in a place, a private hospital, a quiet place, up in Wisconsin, Lake Geneva, I think, a place called Fairhaven. It was the key, the final, crucial piece of intelligence they needed." Sarah Connolly drove up to Lake Geneva the next day. Fairhaven was a beautiful, sprawling estate on the shores of the lake, a place that looked more like a luxury resort than a mental hospital. It was a place where the wealthy and powerful sent their inconvenient, embarrassing relatives to be hidden away from the world. Getting inside was difficult, but Sarah was a resourceful journalist. Posing as a prospective client for her own ailing mother, she managed to get a tour of the facility, and in a sun-drenched, glass-enclosed solarium surrounded by potted plants, she found her. Eleanor Vance was a pale, thin woman in her late 30s, with the same delicate features as her daughters, but her eyes were vacant, clouded with a haze of medication and despair. She sat in a wicker chair, staring out at the frozen lake, a ghost in a beautiful, sunlit prison. Sarah managed to speak to her for a few minutes, away from the watchful eyes of the nurses. She spoke of her daughters, of their life in the library, of their love for their father's history books. For a moment, a flicker of light, of memory, seemed to break through the fog in Eleanor's eyes. "My girls," she whispered, her voice a dry, unused rustle. "Walter, he said they were being taken care of. He said they were happy. They are brave, and they are good," Sarah said gently. "But they are not happy, Mrs. Vance. They are alone, and they need their mother." Sarah left Fairhaven with a heavy heart, but also with a new, powerful weapon, the testimony, however fragile, of the girl's mother. She had been lied to, isolated, and effectively imprisoned by her own brother, who had used her grief and her illness as a tool to gain control of her children and her fortune. The story was now complete. Sarah Connolly wrote the article of her career. It was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, a story that was both a heartbreaking human drama and a damning indictment of a powerful man. She laid out the entire sordid tale: the war hero's sacrifice, the mother's tragic illness, the children's secret, lonely life, and the uncle's cold, calculated greed. She had quotes from the gallery owner, she had the veiled but powerful testimony from her visit to Fairhaven, and she had the quiet, dignified voice of David Cole, the janitor sergeant who had refused to look away. The article, titled "The Orphans of the North Shore," ran on the front page of the Sunday edition of the Chicago Tribune. It was an explosion, a scandal that rocked the city to its foundations. Walter Jennings' carefully constructed world of philanthropy and public service came crashing down around him. His friends, his business partners, the charities whose boards he sat on, they all rushed to distance themselves from him. He was a pariah, his reputation destroyed in a single devastating blow. The public outcry was immediate and overwhelming. The district attorney's office, under intense public pressure, launched a full-scale investigation into his administration of his brother-in-law's estate, and a crusading, high-profile lawyer, having read the article, took on Eleanor Vance's case pro bono, filing a lawsuit to have her released from Fairhaven and to have her legal guardianship of her children restored. Walter Jennings, the man who had seemed so untouchable, so invincible, was broken. He had been defeated not by an army, but by the quiet, persistent courage of a handful of ordinary people, a journalist who believed in the truth and a soldier who believed in a duty that extended far beyond the battlefield. David Cole, the janitor, had gone to war, and he had won. The publication of Sarah Connolly's article was like a dam breaking. The story, once a secret held by a handful of people, was now the subject of intense public fascination and outrage. For Walter Jennings, the fallout was swift and brutal. His phone rang off the hook with calls from angry board members and former friends. His wife, a woman whose entire existence was predicated on maintaining their social standing, reportedly had a nervous breakdown of her own. The fortress of wealth and influence he had built around himself crumbled in a matter of days, its walls breached by the simple, powerful truth. For David, the sudden glaring spotlight was deeply uncomfortable. He was a man who had always operated in the background, a quiet professional who did his job and avoided attention. Now he was a central figure in the city's biggest scandal. Reporters and photographers camped outside the library, hoping to get a picture or a quote from the janitor hero. He refused all interviews, his only statement a quiet, firm, "I just did what anyone should have done." He continued to show up for his night shift, pushing his mop through the now famous halls, a silent, dignified rebuke to the media circus that had sprung up around him. But his primary concern was for the girls. The library, which had been their sanctuary, was now the epicenter of the storm. He knew they could not stay there. The night the article was published, he found them in their usual corner, looking small and terrified. A copy of the newspaper spread out on the table before them, their own faces staring up from the front page. "Is it true?" Isabel asked, her voice trembling, pointing to the part of the article about her mother. "Is she really alive?" "Yes," David said gently, sitting down with them. "She is, and she's been waiting for you." He knew he had to get them somewhere safe, away from the prying eyes of the press and the potential desperate last-ditch efforts of their uncle. He made a call to the only person he knew he could trust implicitly, the crusading lawyer who had taken on their mother's case, a man named Arthur Hayes. Hayes was a force of nature, a brilliant, passionate attorney who had made a career out of fighting for the underdog. He arrived at the library within the hour, his presence a whirlwind of protective energy. He arranged for the girls to be placed in a temporary, confidential foster home, a safe house run by a Catholic charity he worked with, a place where no reporters, and certainly no one from Walter Jennings' camp, could find them. The farewell at the library was wrenching. For Isabel and Chloe, David had been their one constant, their protector, their friend. The thought of leaving him was terrifying. "Will we see you again?" Chloe asked, her small face streaked with tears as she hugged him goodbye. "You bet you will, little soldier," David said, his own voice thick with an emotion he could not name. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll be right here, waiting for you." As he watched them being driven away to their new, safe, but still temporary home, he felt a profound sense of loss. They had become the quiet center of his lonely life, and their absence left a void. But he knew this was a necessary step. They were no longer his secret to protect. Their fight had moved into a new arena, the world of courtrooms and legal battles, a world where he was now a key witness. The legal proceedings moved with a speed that was unusual for the clogged Chicago court system, propelled by the force of public opinion. The first victory came quickly. A judge, having reviewed the evidence presented by Arthur Hayes, including a deposition from a now lucid and fiercely determined Eleanor Vance, issued an emergency order, stripping Walter Jennings of his guardianship and transferring it to the state. The girls were officially free from their uncle's control. The second, and more profound victory came a month later. In a closed hearing, a judge ruled that Eleanor Vance had been illegally committed to the Fairhaven sanatorium. Her brother had exploited her grief and her subsequent depression, convincing her to sign documents she did not understand, effectively imprisoning her to gain control of her finances. She was declared legally sane and competent, and her full parental rights were restored. The reunion between Eleanor and her daughters took place in a quiet, private room in the courthouse. David had been asked to be there, a silent witness to the moment he had worked so hard to make possible. He stood in the corner of the room as Eleanor, looking fragile but with a new steel-like resolve in her eyes, walked in. Isabel and Chloe, who had only known their mother as a distant, fading memory, hung back, shy and uncertain. Eleanor knelt down, her eyes filling with tears. "My beautiful, brave girls," she whispered, her voice choked with years of unshed grief and love. "I'm so sorry. I thought you were safe. I never would have. I'm so sorry." And then Chloe, the younger, more impulsive one, broke the spell. She ran to her mother and threw her arms around her neck. "Mama," she cried, "I knew you'd come back for us." Isabel followed, and the three of them clung to each other, a small, shattered family finally, miraculously, being made whole again. David watched, his own eyes burning. This was the true victory. This was the reason for the fight. It was not about punishing Walter Jennings. It was about this. It was about restoring a family, about giving these two brave little girls their mother back. He slipped out of the room, leaving them to their private, sacred reunion. His own mission quietly, completely fulfilled. In the months that followed, the Vance family began the long, difficult process of rebuilding their lives. The legal system for once worked on their behalf. Walter Jennings, facing a mountain of criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement, agreed to a massive settlement. He returned every penny of his brother-in-law's estate with interest. The beautiful brick house in Oak Park, which had been standing empty, was returned to them. Eleanor, with the help of her daughters and a team of dedicated therapists, began to heal. The fog of her long depression, which had been exacerbated by the heavy medications at Fairhaven, began to lift. She started painting again, her studio filled with the light and color that had been absent from her life for so long. Her first new works were not of irises, but a series of portraits of her two daughters, their faces now full of a new, radiant hope. But the world they were re-entering was not the same one they had left. Eleanor was no longer the naive, sheltered wife of a university professor. She was a survivor, a woman who had seen the dark, predatory underbelly of her own privileged world. And she had not forgotten the man who had been her family's rescuer. She sought David out. She came to the library, not as a wealthy patron, but as a humble, grateful friend. She found him in the basement, in the janitor's small, cluttered break room. "Sergeant Cole," she said, her voice full of a quiet, profound respect. "I don't think I could ever find the words to thank you for what you've done for my family. You saved us. You saved all of us." David, uncomfortable with her praise, just nodded. "I'm just glad your girls are home, Mom. That's all that matters." "It is not all that matters," she said, her gaze steady. "What also matters is that a man of your character, your intelligence, your honor is spending his nights mopping floors. It's not right. It's a waste." She then made him an offer that stunned him into silence. She was establishing a new, charitable foundation, funded by the money she had recovered from her brother. The Vance Foundation's mission would be to provide legal aid and support for vulnerable children, for the other Isabels and Chloes who were lost in the cracks of the system, and she wanted David to be its first director. "Me?" he stammered, bewildered. "Ma'am, I'm a janitor. I'm not a foundation director. I don't have a college degree. I don't know anything about running a charity." If David's steadfast honor in this moment has moved you, his simple belief in doing what is right, no matter the cost, a super thanks is the most direct way to help us continue to honor souls as decent and courageous as his. "You have a degree in honor, Sergeant," she replied, her voice firm. "You have a doctorate in integrity, and you know more about what it's like to be invisible and powerless than any 10 men with fancy college degrees. You are the only person for this job. You will have a staff, you will have a budget, you will have my full support. What I need is your moral compass. I need your heart." It was an offer that was both terrifying and exhilarating. It was a chance to leave behind the lonely, dead-end life of a night shift janitor. It was a chance to take the quiet, personal code of honor that had always guided him and turn it into a public mission. It was a chance to spend the rest of his life fighting for the other lost soldiers, the small, invisible children who were just trying to find a safe place in the world. He thought of Isabel and Chloe, of their fierce, brave faces. He thought of the quiet satisfaction he had felt in that small, simple act of giving them a cup of hot chocolate on a cold night. to be able to do that on a grander scale every single day. It was a purpose. It was the peace he had been searching for ever since he had come home from the war. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice quiet but full of a new, unshakable conviction. "I'd be honored to accept." The transition from the quiet anonymity of the library basement to the bustling, purposeful world of the Vance Foundation was a seismic shift in David Cole's life. For the first time since leaving the army, he had a mission that was worthy of his skills, a role that demanded not just his physical labor, but his intellect, his strategic mind, and his profound, hard-won understanding of human nature. The Foundation's offices, located in a modest but respectable building downtown, were a world away from the janitor's closet, and the work was more challenging and more fulfilling than anything he had ever imagined. Eleanor Vance had been true to her word. She was his silent partner, his benefactor, but she was not his boss. She had given him the resources and the autonomy to build the foundation from the ground up, according to his own vision. She trusted his judgment, his moral compass, and she deferred to him on all operational matters. It was a partnership built on a foundation of deep, mutual respect. David, in turn, approached his new role with the same methodical, disciplined approach he had applied to every challenge in his life. He knew his own limitations. He did not have the legal or financial expertise to run the foundation alone, so his first act as director was to assemble a team. He recruited Arthur Hayes, the brilliant crusading lawyer who had won Eleanor's case, to serve as the foundation's chief legal counsel. He hired a sharp, no-nonsense accountant to manage the finances. And for his chief investigator, the person who would be his eyes and ears on the streets of Chicago, he made an unconventional, brilliant choice. He hired Sarah Connolly, the journalist who had broken the story. Sarah, who was growing weary of the daily grind and cynical atmosphere of the newspaper world, jumped at the chance. She, like David, was a person who was driven by a deep, passionate need to see justice done. Together, they formed a small, formidable team, a rapid response unit for the city's most vulnerable children. The early days were a whirlwind of activity. They established the Foundation's mission. They set up protocols. They built a network of contacts in the city's schools, hospitals, and social services. Their work was quiet, painstaking, and largely invisible. They did not seek publicity. Their goal was not to create headlines, but to solve problems. They helped a young boy who was being shuttled between indifferent foster homes, getting him placed with a stable, loving family. They intervened on behalf of a teenage girl who had run away from an abusive home, securing her a spot in a safe house and a scholarship to continue her education. They fought for the rights of immigrant children who were being exploited in sweatshops, using the threat of legal action and Sarah's investigative reporting to force the factory owners to comply with child labor laws. David was the heart and soul of the operation. He was not a desk-bound administrator. He was a field commander. He was the one who would go into the city's toughest neighborhoods, who would sit in the grim waiting rooms of public housing offices, who would talk to the scared, forgotten children that the system had cast aside. He had a unique, powerful gift for connecting with them. He did not speak to them with pity or condescension. He spoke to them with respect, as little soldiers caught in a war they did not choose. He saw their strength, their resilience, their fierce, desperate pride, and he honored it. He was one of them, a survivor, and they knew it. His relationship with the Vance family, particularly with Eleanor, deepened and evolved. They were no longer just a benefactor and her employee. They were partners, co-conspirators in a shared mission. He would have dinner at the Oak Park house once a week, ostensibly to update her on the Foundation's work. But these evenings soon became a comfortable, easy ritual of friendship. He would talk to Eleanor about his cases, and she, in turn, would share her own struggles and triumphs as she navigated her new life. He watched as Isabel and Chloe continued to heal and to thrive. They were attending a good private school. They had friends. They were rediscovering the simple, joyful rhythms of a normal childhood, but they had not forgotten their time in the library or the man who had been their guardian there. They adored David. He was their hero, their confidant, their link to a past that they were learning to understand not as a source of shame, but as a testament to their own survival. It was during one of these quiet domestic evenings at the Vance home that David's past, the part of his life he had thought was long buried, came back to haunt him. Eleanor had been going through her late husband's papers, organizing his academic files. She came into the living room with a small leather-bound journal in her hands, a puzzled look on her face. "David," she said, "I found this among Michael's things. It's a journal he kept in Korea. I was reading it, and I found something I think you should see." She handed him the journal. David opened it, his hands suddenly unsteady. The handwriting was neat, academic, the script of a professor. He began to read, and the comfortable, safe world of the Oak Park living room dissolved, and he was transported back to the cold, grey, mud-caked hell of the Korean War. Captain Vance's journal was a powerful, moving account of his time at the front. He wrote of the fear, the exhaustion, the brutal, senseless violence. But mostly he wrote about his men. He wrote about their courage, their humor, their quiet acts of decency in the midst of chaos. And then David saw it, a series of entries from the winter of 1952, during the brutal, bloody battle for a desolate, frozen piece of high ground the soldiers had nicknamed Heartbreak Ridge. December 5th, Captain Vance had written, "My company was pinned down today by heavy machine gun fire. We were trapped in a gully, taking heavy casualties. Our radio was out. It seemed hopeless. Then a sergeant from Charlie Company, a young black NCO named Cole, did the bravest thing I have ever seen. Under a hail of enemy fire, he single-handedly repaired the damaged communication line, crawling on his belly for 100 yards over open, frozen ground. His action re-established our contact with battalion headquarters and allowed us to call in an artillery strike that saved us all. I've never witnessed such cold, calculated courage. He is a man made of pure steel." David stared at the page, his heart pounding in his chest. He remembered that day. He remembered the whining sound of the bullets snapping past his head, the bitter, metallic taste of fear in his mouth. He had not thought of it as courage. He had thought of it as his job. The line was broken. His job was to fix it. It was that simple. He continued to read, his hands trembling. A few pages later, there was another entry. December 10th. "We took the ridge today, but the cost was terrible. We lost a lot of good men. I was hit. A piece of shrapnel in my leg. It's not serious, but I was unable to move. I was lying in the open, and the enemy was counterattacking. I thought it was over. Then he was there again, Sergeant Cole. He came back for me. He threw me over his shoulder and carried me under fire to the aid station. He is not in my company. He had no duty to come back for me. He did it because he is a good man, a decent man. He saved my life today. I owe him everything. If I ever get out of this hell, I will find him. I will thank him. I will tell him that he is the finest soldier I have ever had the honor of serving with." David closed the journal, his eyes blurred with tears. Captain Michael Vance, the man he had never met, the man whose family he had stumbled into, helping by a random act of fate, was the same man whose life he had saved on a frozen, forgotten hill on the other side of the world. The world, which had seemed so large, so chaotic, so random, was in fact a small, intricate and mysterious place, woven together by invisible threads of connection, of duty, of sacrifice. Eleanor was watching him, her own eyes shining with tears. "It was you," she whispered, "all this time. The man who saved my husband's life was the same man who saved his family. It's not a coincidence, it's a miracle." David, a man who did not believe in miracles, who believed only in the hard, practical realities of the world, did not know what to say. He looked at the journal, at this message from a dead man, this testament of a debt that had been repaid in the most unexpected and profound of ways. He had gone into the library that first night simply to do a job, to bring a little order to a small corner of the world. He had seen 2 children in need and had offered them a small, simple kindness. And in doing so, he had unknowingly completed a circle, fulfilled a promise, and balanced a scale that he had never even known was tilted. He had come home from the war a ghost, a man haunted by the things he had seen, by the men he had lost. But now, in this quiet, sunlit room, surrounded by the family he had both saved and been saved by, he finally truly felt at peace. The war was over, and he was home. The revelation found in Captain Vance's journal was a profound, seismic event, reshaping the emotional landscape for everyone it touched. For Eleanor, it was as if a missing piece of her life's puzzle had been found, a piece she hadn't even known was lost. Her husband's death in Korea had always been an abstract, distant fact, a telegram followed by a sealed coffin. The journal had given him back to her, not just as a husband and a father, but as a soldier, a man of courage and honor. And the story of his rescue, the incredible, impossible coincidence of it, imbued his death with a new, deeper meaning. His life had been saved by a good man. A debt of honor had been created, and that debt had been repaid years later through an act of grace that protected his most precious legacy, his children. It was a story of such perfect, tragic symmetry that it felt almost like a myth, a testament to the invisible, unbreakable bonds that connect human lives across time and distance. For Isabel and Chloe, the story was a gift of a different kind. It solidified their father's place in their hearts as a hero, but it also made their rescuer David a part of their father's story. David was no longer just the kind man who had saved them from the streets. He was a figure from their father's past, a comrade in arms, a man who had shared the crucible of war with him. This connection gave them a sense of continuity, of a legacy being honored and fulfilled. It grounded their own chaotic, fractured history in a larger, more meaningful narrative. They were the daughters of a hero who had been saved by another hero. It was a story that gave them not just comfort, but a powerful sense of their own identity. But for David, the revelation was the most complex and unsettling. He was a man who had built his life on a foundation of quiet, pragmatic duty. He did not believe in fate or destiny. He believed in doing the job that was in front of him. To be suddenly cast as a character in a grand, almost novelistic drama of interconnected lives was deeply disorienting. He had saved Captain Vance's life. It was a fact, a memory he had filed away along with 1,000 other brutal, chaotic memories of the war. He had never thought of it as a debt that needed to be repaid. It was simply what a soldier did. You didn't leave a man behind. And yet, he could not deny the profound, resonant power of the coincidence. It felt as if his entire life, from the frozen hills of Korea to the silent, dusty aisles of the Chicago Public Library, had been leading him to this family. He was a man who had always felt like an outsider, a solitary observer. But the journal revealed that he had been a part of the Vance family's story long before he had ever met them. He was not an outsider. He was an integral, essential piece of their history. The feeling was not one of pride, but of a deep, humbling sense of belonging, a feeling he had not realized he had been searching for his entire life. In the wake of this revelation, the relationship between David and Eleanor began to subtly but profoundly shift. The professional boundaries of their work at the foundation, the social boundaries of their different backgrounds, all began to soften, replaced by a new, deeper intimacy. They were no longer just partners in a shared mission. They were two people bound together by a shared history of loss and a shared miracle of redemption. They would spend hours talking, sharing stories of their pasts. Eleanor spoke of her sheltered, privileged upbringing, of her whirlwind romance with the brilliant, charismatic history professor, of the profound, disorienting grief that had shattered her world after his death. She spoke of her illness, her breakdown, not with shame, but with a new, hard-won clarity, seeing it not as a personal failing, but as a testament to the devastating power of loss. David, in turn, began to open up in a way he never had before. He spoke of his own childhood in the segregated South, of the quiet, daily humiliations, of the fierce determination that had driven him to escape into the relative meritocracy of the army. He spoke of the war, not of the battles and the heroics, but of the quiet moments in between, the friendships, the fear, the profound, soul-crushing weariness of it all. He spoke of his own loneliness, of the feeling of being a ghost in his own life. a man who had survived a war but had not yet truly found a way to live in the peace. In each other's stories, they found a reflection of their own. They were two profoundly different people from opposite ends of the American social spectrum, but they had both been shaped by the same forces, by love, by loss, by the brutal random hand of history. They were two survivors, two lonely souls who had, through the most improbable of circumstances, found in each other a safe harbor, a place of understanding and acceptance. A new, unspoken question began to hang in the air between them. Was this profound connection just a deep, abiding friendship born of shared trauma and mutual respect? Or was it something more? The idea was terrifying, unthinkable, a breach of every known social convention of their time. She was a wealthy white widow, a pillar of Chicago society. He was a working-class black veteran. The chasm between their worlds was, by the standards of 1950s America, unbridgeable, and yet the connection was undeniable. It was in the easy, comfortable silence that could fall between them, in the way they could understand each other with a single glance, in the deep, resonant respect they had for each other's character. They had both seen the true measure of the other's soul, stripped bare of all the external trappings of race and class. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, and she had seen him at his most honorable. The children, with their innocent, unfiltered wisdom, saw it first. "You should marry Mr. Cole, Mama," Chloe said one evening, with the simple, direct logic of a child. "Then he could be our father for real." The statement, so innocent and yet so profound, left Eleanor flustered and speechless. But it also planted a seed. The thought, once unthinkable, began to take root in her mind. What was she afraid of? The judgment of a society whose hypocrisy she now saw with such clarity. The disapproval of friends who had not been there for her in her darkest hour. She had spent her life living according to the rules, and it had led her to a private sanatorium, a prisoner of her own grief and her brother's greed. David Cole, a man who lived by his own internal code of honor, was the one who had led her back into the light. To deny the connection between them out of fear of what the world might think felt like a betrayal, not just of him, but of her own hard-won freedom. For David, the feelings were even more complex, more fraught with danger. To love a white woman, especially a wealthy, prominent one, was to invite a world of trouble, of hatred, of violence. He had spent his life navigating the treacherous terrain of American racism, and he knew the rules of survival. This was a line that was not meant to be crossed. And yet, how could he deny the truth of his own heart? He had never met a woman like Eleanor Vance. He admired her intelligence. He was humbled by her resilience. He was moved by her quiet, deep-running kindness. He was falling in love with her, and the knowledge was both a joy and a terror. The unspoken tension finally broke one evening in late spring. They were working late at the foundation office, going over the details of a difficult new case. The city was quiet outside, the office filled with a comfortable, companionable silence. "David," Eleanor said, her voice quiet, her gaze direct, "there is something we need to talk about." And so they did. They spoke of the fear, of the risks, of the impossible social chasm that separated them. They spoke of the world as it was, a world of prejudice and hate. And they spoke of the small, safe world they had built together, a world of trust, respect, and a deep, abiding affection. "I know what the world will say," Eleanor said, her voice trembling but firm, "and I have decided that I no longer care. I have spent too much of my life being afraid. I will not be afraid of this. I will not be afraid of a chance at happiness." David looked at her, at this brave, beautiful, impossible woman, and he felt his own walls of fear and self-preservation begin to crumble. He had spent his life as a soldier, always fighting for others. The idea of fighting for his own happiness, for a future he had never allowed himself to dream of, was a new and terrifying kind of battle. But looking at her, he knew it was a battle he was willing to fight. "I am not a man who has much to offer, Eleanor," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he could not hide. "I am not from your world. I cannot give you the life you are accustomed to. You have already given me everything that matters, David," she replied, her eyes shining with tears. "You gave me back my children. You gave me back my life. All I am asking is that you let me share it with you." "Adi," And in the quiet, unassuming office of the foundation they had built together, two people from two different worlds, two survivors who had found each other through a miracle of chance and a legacy of honor, finally, bravely, chose to build a new world of their own. Their decision to build a life together was not a fairy tale ending. It was the beginning of a new, quiet, and often difficult battle. They were two intelligent, pragmatic people who understood the world they lived in. They knew that their love, while a source of profound personal joy, would be seen by the outside world as a transgression, a provocation. They chose to face this reality not with a grand, defiant gesture, but with the same quiet, strategic intelligence that had guided them through their previous struggles. Their marriage, which took place a few months later, was a small, private affair. It was held not in a grand church, but in the sun-drenched living room of the Oak Park house, a space that had been reclaimed and reconsecrated by their family's survival. The only guests were their small, fiercely loyal inner circle: Arthur Hayes, the lawyer, Sarah Connolly, the journalist, and David's sister, who traveled up from the south for the occasion. Isabel and Chloe were the bridesmaids, their faces alight with a pure, uncomplicated happiness that was the ceremony's greatest blessing. For the first few years, they constructed a life that was, in many ways, an island. They created a sanctuary in the Oak Park house, a world where the rules of the outside society did not apply. It was a home filled with books, with art, with the lively, intelligent conversation of their friends, a place where race and class were irrelevant, and character was the only currency that mattered. David, at Eleanor's insistence, moved into the house, but he did not abandon his own past. He brought with him his small collection of jazz records, his well-worn army footlocker, and his quiet, unpretentious dignity. He was not a guest in his wife's grand house. He was its co-creator, its partner, its steady, grounding presence. He became a true father to Isabel and Chloe. He was the one who taught them how to drive, who helped them with their science projects, who sat on the porch with them and talked about life, about honor, about the importance of fighting for what you believe in. He gave them a model of manhood that was a powerful living counterpoint to the memory of their uncle's cruel, weak brand of masculinity. He was a man of quiet strength, of unwavering integrity, of gentle, steadfast love. Together, David and Eleanor continued to pour their energy into the Vance Foundation. It grew in size and influence, becoming one of the most respected and effective child advocacy organizations in the city. David was its public face and its moral core, a man who moved with a quiet, unimpeachable authority through the corridors of power, from the grimy halls of the juvenile court to the polished boardrooms of the city's wealthiest philanthropists. He was a bridge between two worlds, a man who had lived in the basement and now commanded the respect of the penthouse, and he used that unique position to fight for the children who were still trapped in the shadows. But the outside world could not be kept at bay forever. Their interracial marriage, while a private, personal affair, was a public fact. In the rarefied, insular world of Chicago's North Shore society, it was a scandal of epic proportions. Eleanor's former friends, the women she had once hosted at luncheons and charity balls, now shunned her. They would cross the street to avoid her, their polite smiles replaced by cold, disapproving stares. Invitations to social events, which had once filled her mailbox, stopped coming. She was excommunicated, cast out of the tribe she had once been a queen of. For Eleanor, this social ostracism was, at first, painful. It was a rejection of everything she had once been, but she soon came to see it as a kind of liberation. The world that had rejected her was a world of shallow, superficial values, a world that had stood by and done nothing while her brother had stolen her life. Her new world, the world she had built with David, was smaller, but it was real. It was populated by people of substance, of courage, of conscience. She had not lost a social circle. She had shed a dead skin. For David, the prejudice they faced was a more familiar and often more dangerous beast. He was accustomed to the subtle, daily slights of a racist society. But now, as the husband of a wealthy white woman, he was a new kind of target. He was seen as an interloper, an upstart, a man who had transgressed the most sacred and fiercely guarded of the nation's racial taboos. He endured the stares, the whispered insults, the doors that were quietly closed in his face. He weathered it all with his usual stoic, quiet dignity, his primary concern not for his own pride, but for the safety and well-being of his new family. Their greatest test came not from the polite, veiled racism of the North Shore, but from the raw, violent hatred of the world that lay beyond it. Walter Jennings, though legally defeated and socially disgraced, had not disappeared. He had lost his fortune and his reputation, and he festered in a self-imposed exile, his mind consumed by a bitter, poisonous hatred for the man he blamed for his downfall. He began a campaign of harassment. Anonymous, threatening letters began to arrive at the foundation. Vile, racist graffiti was spray-painted on the walls of their house. It was a war of cowardly, psychological attrition, designed to terrorize them, to drive a wedge of fear into their peaceful, happy lives. David and Eleanor refused to be intimidated. They installed a new security system, they hired a private guard, and they continued to live their lives with a quiet, defiant normalcy. But the threat was always there, a low, constant hum of menace in the background of their lives. The crisis came to a head one night when David was driving home late from a fundraising dinner for the foundation. He noticed a car, a dark, nondescript sedan, following him. He took a series of evasive turns, his old military instincts kicking in, but the car stayed with him. On a dark, deserted stretch of road, the car pulled alongside him and forced him to the shoulder. Two men got out. They were not the sophisticated thugs of a gangster movie. They were something far more common, and in some ways, more terrifying. They were ordinary-looking white men, their faces twisted with an ugly, self-righteous rage. They were the kind of men Walter Jennings could easily hire with the last of his money, men who felt their own small, insignificant lives were ennobled by the act of putting a black man in his place. They dragged David from his car. They did not speak of money or of Walter Jennings. They spoke the raw, brutal language of racial hatred. "You think you can just take one of our women?" one of them snarled, his breath foul with the smell of cheap whiskey. David did not panic. He did not beg. He stood before them, his back straight, his face a calm, unreadable mask. He was a soldier, and he had faced down death before. He would not give these men the satisfaction of seeing his fear. But before the first blow could be struck, the night was split by the sudden, blinding glare of headlights and the wail of a police siren. A squad car, which had been on a routine patrol, screeched to a halt behind them. The two thugs, caught in the unexpected spotlight, froze for a second, then scrambled back to their car and sped off into the night. David was left standing on the side of the road, his heart pounding, his body trembling with the aftershock of adrenaline. The police officer, a young professional cop, took his statement, his face grim. He knew what this was. He had seen it before. When David finally arrived home, shaken but unharmed, he found Eleanor waiting for him, her face a pale mask of terror. The police had called her. He walked into her arms, and for the first time he allowed the full, terrifying reality of what had just happened to wash over him. The world's ugliness had breached their fortress. It had come for him, and it had almost succeeded. That night, as they sat together in the quiet darkness of their living room, they knew they had reached a crossroads. They could retreat. They could leave Chicago, move to a place where they were not known, a place where they could live in anonymous, safe obscurity, or they could stand their ground. They could fight. "I will not let them win," Eleanor said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. "I will not let their hatred drive us from our home, from the life we have built. I will not be a victim again, ever." David looked at his wife, at this woman of incredible, unyielding strength, and he felt his own resolve harden. He was a soldier, and a soldier does not retreat. A soldier stands his ground. "No," he said, his voice quiet, but full of a new, cold and deadly seriousness. "We are not leaving. We are going to end this for good." The attack on David was a declaration of war, and it was one that he and Eleanor decided to meet not with fear, but with a cold, calculated strategy. They were no longer just defending their private life. They were fighting a battle for the very principle of their existence. They knew that as long as Walter Jennings was free to nurse his bitter, venomous hatred, they would never truly be safe. The campaign of harassment had escalated from anonymous threats to physical violence. The next attempt, they knew, might not be interrupted by a passing police car. David, the soldier, and Eleanor, the woman who had learned the hard lessons of power, sat down at their dining room table and planned their counter-offensive. They understood that the legal system, which had been their ally in the guardianship case, was a blunt and often ineffective instrument against this kind of insidious, hate-fueled vendetta. The two thugs who had attacked David were anonymous faces in the night. Proving a direct link to Walter Jennings would be nearly impossible. He was too clever, too insulated, to be caught giving a direct order. To defeat him, they needed to move outside the conventional channels of the law. They needed to fight him on their own terms. Their strategy had two fronts. The first was defense. David, using his military expertise, transformed the Oak Park house into a quiet suburban fortress. He worked with a private security firm to install a state-of-the-art alarm system. He hired a team of discreet, professional bodyguards, former military policemen he had known and trusted from his army days, to provide round-the-clock protection for his family. He taught Eleanor and a now teenage Isabel and Chloe the principles of situational awareness, how to spot a tail, how to vary their routines, how to never, ever be a predictable target. Their beautiful, happy home was now also a secure command post, a place where they were no longer vulnerable. The second and more crucial front was offense. They needed to neutralize Walter Jennings, not by responding to his attacks, but by preempting them. They needed to take away his power to harm them, and his only remaining power, they knew, was his money. Though he had been forced to return the Vance estate, he still had his own considerable fortune from his manufacturing business. It was this money that allowed him to hire thugs to continue to live a life of insulated, bitter privilege. Their weapon, once again, was Sarah Connolly. David and Eleanor called a meeting with her at the foundation office. They laid out the situation, the escalating harassment, the attack on David. Sarah, whose journalistic instincts were matched only by her fierce loyalty to the family whose story had made her career, was outraged. "He's not just a thief," she said, her voice tight with anger. "He's a monster. He needs to be stopped." "But we can't prove he's behind it," Eleanor said. "Not in a court of law." "Then we won't fight him in a court of law," David said, his voice quiet and firm. "We'll fight him in the court of public opinion and in the financial markets." He then laid out his plan, a piece of strategic intelligence work that was as brilliant as it was ruthless. "Sarah," he said, "Jennings' company, Jennings Manufacturing, is a publicly traded corporation. He's the CEO and the majority shareholder. But a public company has vulnerabilities. It's accountable to its shareholders, to its customers, and to the public. I want you to start digging, not into his personal life, into his business. I want to know everything. I want to know about his labor practices, his safety record, his environmental compliance. A man who is this corrupt in his personal life is not running a clean business. I guarantee it. Find the dirt. Find the crime." For the next 2 months, Sarah Connolly, with the full confidential backing of the Vance Foundation's resources, became an investigative whirlwind. She was no longer just a reporter. She was an intelligence operative. She interviewed disgruntled former employees of Jennings Manufacturing. She dug through obscure public records, looking for workplace safety violations, for lawsuits that had been quietly settled, for environmental citations that had been buried. And she found it. She found a pattern of systemic, deliberate corner-cutting and malfeasance. She uncovered evidence that Jennings Manufacturing had been illegally dumping industrial waste into a tributary of the Chicago River for years. She found proof that the company had been systematically violating safety regulations, leading to a series of accidents that had been covered up and paid off. and she found the smoking gun, a major contract the company had with the city of Chicago to supply steel girders for a new public housing project. She discovered, through a source in the city inspector's office, that Jennings had been using inferior, cheaper steel and had been bribing the inspectors to look the other way. He was building slums with substandard materials, endangering the lives of hundreds of poor families, all to increase his profit margin. The story was an even bigger bombshell than the one about his nieces. This was not a private family drama. This was a massive public corruption scandal. Sarah wrote a devastating multi-part expose, meticulously documented and legally airtight. But they did not just publish it. David and Eleanor's plan was more sophisticated than that. A week before the story was scheduled to run in the Tribune, Arthur Hayes, their lawyer, requested a private, off-the-record meeting with Walter Jennings and his legal team. The meeting took place in a neutral downtown law office. Jennings arrived, arrogant and defiant, assuming this was a meeting about the harassment, a meeting where he held all the cards. He was wrong. Hayes did not begin with accusations. He began by laying a thick, bound document on the polished conference table. It was an advance copy of Sarah Connolly's series, complete with photographs, depositions from former employees, and copies of the falsified inspection reports. "As you can see, Mr. Jennings," Hayes said, his voice calm and professional, "we have a problem. This story is scheduled to run on the front page of the Tribune this Sunday. It will, of course, trigger an immediate federal investigation into your business practices. Given the evidence, a conviction on multiple counts of fraud, bribery, and racketeering is a near certainty. You are looking at a prison sentence of no less than 20 years. Jennings stared at the document, his face turning the color of old parchment. The blood drained from his face as he realized the sheer, overwhelming, and utterly indefensible scope of the evidence against him. He had been completely, surgically outmaneuvered. "What do you want?" he rasped, his voice a dry, defeated whisper. "We want you to disappear," David said, speaking for the first time. He had been sitting at the end of the table, a silent, imposing presence. "You will sell your controlling interest in your company. You will resign from every board, every club. You will take your money and you will move. To Florida, to Arizona, I don't care. But you will leave Chicago, and you will never, ever contact or interfere with my family again, in any way. And if I don't," Jennings sneered, a last flicker of his old arrogance. "If you don't," Hayes said, picking up the document, "this story runs on Sunday, and the world you have built will cease to exist." It was not a negotiation. It was an unconditional surrender. Walter Jennings, the man who had terrorized a family, who had built an empire on greed and corruption, was finally, irrevocably broken. He had been defeated by the very people he had dismissed as weak and insignificant. 2 weeks later, a short, bland article appeared on the business page of the Tribune, announcing that Walter Jennings was retiring for health reasons and selling his stake in his company. A few days after that, the grand mansion on the North Shore was quietly put up for sale. Walter Jennings had, as David had commanded, disappeared. The war was over. The threat was gone. And in the quiet, peaceful aftermath, the Riley Vance family was finally, truly free. They had not just survived, they had triumphed. They had fought a war on multiple fronts, against grief, against poverty, against social prejudice, against a corrupt and powerful man, and they had won. They had done it not with weapons or with anger, but with intelligence, with courage, and with an unshakable belief in the power of decency and truth. Their life returned to a new, deeper kind of normal. The security guards were dismissed. The alarm system was disarmed. The Oak Park house was once again just a home, a place of light and love and laughter. Isabel and Chloe went off to college, two brilliant, confident young women who carried their family's legacy of resilience and honor into the world. And David and Eleanor grew old together. Their love story, born in the most unlikely of circumstances, became the quiet, steady anchor of their lives. They continued their work with the foundation, two quiet, unassuming soldiers in a never-ending war for the city's forgotten children. Their partnership was a testament to the profound, transformative power of human connection, a living proof that the deepest bonds are not forged in the easy sunshine of social convention, but in the hard, shared struggle for justice in the darkness. They were a family made not of blood, but of courage, a testament to the enduring truth that the greatest fortresses are not built of brick and stone, but of love, honor, and an unyielding commitment to doing what is right. The final definitive victory over Walter Jennings did not bring a triumphant celebration. It brought a deep, quiet, and profound peace. It was the peace of a long war finally ended, the silence that falls over a battlefield after the last shot has been fired. For the first time in their lives together, David and Eleanor and their daughters, Isabel and Chloe, could breathe. The constant, low-grade hum of threat that had been the background noise to their existence was gone. The fortress they had been forced to build around their lives could finally lower its drawbridge. Their house was once again simply a home. In the years that followed, the family flourished in this newfound peace. Isabel, who had inherited her father's passion for history and her mother's artistic eye, became a respected curator at the Art Institute of Chicago. She had a particular gift for uncovering the stories behind the art, for seeing the human struggles and triumphs encoded in the paint and stone. She was, in her own way, a keeper of memories, a guardian of the narratives that give life meaning. Chloe, whose childhood love of drawing horses had blossomed into a deep and abiding passion for all living things, became a veterinarian. She had a special, gentle touch with frightened and wounded animals, a profound empathy that had been forged in her own early years of fear and vulnerability. She opened a small, successful clinic in a working-class neighborhood, often treating the pets of families who could not afford to pay, her work a quiet, daily act of compassion. The Vance Foundation, under David's steady, quiet leadership, grew into a formidable force for good in the city. It became a model for child advocacy, its innovative programs copied in cities across the country. David never became a polished, smooth-talking executive. He remained the man he had always been, a quiet, observant, and deeply compassionate leader who saw the world not from the top down, but from the bottom up. He was most at home not in boardrooms, but in the crowded waiting rooms of family court, sitting with a scared teenager, or in the cramped living rooms of impoverished families, listening to their stories with a patient, respectful ear. He was their advocate, their champion, and in the forgotten corners of the city, he was a quiet, unassuming legend. Eleanor, freed from the last vestiges of her past trauma, entered the most creative and fulfilling period of her artistic life. She painted with a new, bold confidence, her work suffused with a warmth and a deep humanistic compassion that had been absent before. Her paintings were no longer just of elegant, sterile irises. They were portraits of the people whose lives had been touched by the foundation. A determined young girl reading a book, a tired mother holding her sleeping child, a group of children playing in a city park. Her art was a celebration of the quiet, resilient dignity of ordinary people, a testament to the beauty and strength she had found in a world she had once been completely sheltered from. Her work, which had once been a minor society hobby, was now celebrated by critics and sought after by major museums. She had found her voice as a woman and as an artist. David and Eleanor's marriage was the quiet, steady bedrock upon which all of this was built. Their love was not a fiery, passionate romance, but something deeper, stronger, and more enduring. It was a partnership of two equals, a union of two profoundly different people who had found in each other a perfect, complementary strength. They were each other's staunchest ally, most honest critic and greatest admirer. Their home was a place of intellectual curiosity, of lively debate, of easy, comfortable laughter. It was a place where their daughters and eventually their grandchildren, could always find a safe harbor, a place of unconditional love and unwavering moral clarity. One cold, blustery afternoon in the late autumn of their lives, David and Eleanor were walking through the cavernous, echoing halls of the Chicago Public Library. It was a place they returned to often, a kind of pilgrimage to the site where their improbable story had begun. They were there for the dedication of a new children's reading room, a beautiful, light-filled space funded by a generous, anonymous donation from the Vance Foundation. As they stood in the back of the room, listening to the speeches from the city librarian and the mayor, David looked around at the space that had once been his place of work, his lonely, nocturnal kingdom. He saw the high, vaulted ceilings, the long, polished tables, the endless shelves of books, and he saw the children. Dozens of them, from every corner of the city, of every race and class, were sitting on brightly colored cushions, their faces alight with the magic of the stories being read to them. It was a scene of such pure, unadulterated hope, a perfect embodiment of everything he and Eleanor had fought for. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, they walked over to the history section, to the aisle where he had first truly spoken to Isabel, the aisle where he had retrieved the heavy book about the Civil War. He ran his hand along the spines of the books, the rough, familiar texture, a connection to a past that felt both a lifetime away and as immediate as yesterday. "Do you ever think about it?" Eleanor asked softly, her hand slipping into his. "How different it all could have been if you had just kept on mopping that night. If you had just looked away." David was silent for a long moment, the weight of her question settling upon him. He thought of the two small, shivering girls by the library door. He thought of the simple, almost thoughtless impulse that had led him to buy them a cup of hot chocolate. It had been such a small thing, a tiny act of decency in a vast, indifferent world. And yet, it had been the fulcrum upon which all of their lives had turned. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice a low, thoughtful rumble. "I was a soldier for a long time. They teach you to pay attention, to notice the things that are out of place, to see the people who are in trouble. I guess I never really stopped being a soldier." He looked at his wife, at her beautiful, intelligent face, at the lines of laughter and of sorrow that told the story of their shared life. He looked at the library, this great democratic palace of knowledge and of dreams, and he felt a sense of peace so profound, so complete, that it was almost a physical presence. He had come home from the war, a lost and broken man, a hero with no place in the world. He had taken a job as a janitor, the lowest, most invisible of positions, but in that quiet, humble role, he had found his true mission. He had not fought a foreign enemy. He had fought a domestic one, an enemy far more insidious than any army, the enemy of indifference, of cruelty, of injustice, and he had won a victory that was more lasting and more meaningful than any battlefield triumph. His life had not been the one he had planned, but it had been a life of profound, unexpected purpose. He had not sought wealth or fame or power. He had sought only to do his duty, to be a good man in a world that was often anything but, and in doing so, he had built a legacy. It was not a legacy of buildings or of fortunes. It was a legacy of healed lives, of restored families, of children who were now free to read and to dream in a safe, warm room. He squeezed Eleanor's hand, a silent communication of a love that no longer needed words. He was David Cole, the janitor, the sergeant, the foundation director, the husband, the father. He was a man who had stood his ground, who had fought his fight, who had, in the end, brought his soldiers all the way home. And it had all started here, on a cold night, with a simple, quiet, and revolutionary act of seeing the invisible and refusing to look away. Your generous support through Super Thanks ensures that the flame of these powerful memories of hope and the triumph of the human spirit will never be extinguished. Thank you.